We got an awful lot to talk about today. Everything from Sydney Sweeney's new ad to Trump meeting with President Putin in Alaska next week to some restoration of Confederate monuments to some really, really weird stuff happening in Russia and much, much more. We'll try to speed run through it as fast as we can, but welcome to today's episode of The Watchdog. Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are indeed living in biblical times. If you are here with us, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember, you can leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, anything of that nature in the comment section down below. If you'd like to follow us on various social media platforms, I am on Gab, Parler, Minds, Truth Social, Twitter /X/Twix, whatever you'd like to call it, Facebook, MeWe, MetaCafe, and probably something that I'm forgetting about at this moment. Just find me at TheCynicogue on any of those websites. And if you're on those platforms, please do consider sharing this video, excuse me, to those platforms. Also, remember, we do have a Rumble account for this channel. In the event that some of our content gets taken down, or worse, the channel actually gets struck, you can check out everything that we have here on this channel on our Rumble channel. Now, that is titled just TheCynicogue, not TheCynicogue News. When I first made it, I thought I was going to be making it for the theology channel, and then we decided to use it for this channel. So you'll have to find that tag TheCynicogue, not TheCynicogue News, but I digress. Please do consider following us over there on Rumble, where you'll be able to get all of the content we post here on the TheCynicogue News, and you know, just have a backup for yourself in the event that something actually goes wrong over here. If you'd like to contribute to any of the work that we do here, I have 3 links in the description down below. One is a link to the TheCynicogue News Patreon. That will be specifically for the work we do here on the TheCynicogue News, not for my other channels. So if you're wanting to contribute to this work specifically, that is how you would do so. Also, there is a link to the PayPal if you'd like to contribute, but only would like to do so one time instead of subscribing to something like a Patreon. Also, there is a link to my book, 15 Questions for Calvinists Answered. That way you get something a little bit more tangible for your contribution. And of course, anybody who does contribute, we greatly appreciate your contributions. Not a whole lot of channel housekeeping, as is the usual on this channel. Much smaller channel than the other one, right? So if you do happen to know both of them, that's why. Obviously, this channel we're hoping to get a little bit bigger. I'd like to hit at least 100 by the end of the year. That'd be dope. But nevertheless, we do have one last thing, of course, which is our This Day in History fun fact. And as many of you know, I'm a big fan of Civil War history, a little bit of a Civil War nerd. And today is August the 8th, 2025. Well, 162 years ago, on August the 8th, 1863, General Robert E. Lee of the Army of Northern Virginia sent a letter of resignation to Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis refused to accept this letter of resignation and essentially, in so many words, said, no, we need you now more than ever. But the reason Robert E. Lee had actually sent this letter of resignation is because, if you're not familiar, the Battle of Gettysburg, which took place between July 11th and July 3rd, just went disastrously for the Confederate Army, right? So the idea was Robert E. Lee was wanting to invade the South, or excuse me, messing up all my words here, invade the North. And he had a couple of reasons for wanting to do this. Number one, he felt that it would give the Southern land a much needed break. Obviously, at this point, the vast majority of the war had taken place in the South, and as it pertains to the Eastern Theater that Robert E. Lee was involved in, the vast majority of the war took place in his native Virginia. So Virginia at this point, 2 years into the war, is rather war-torn, and he wanted to see if he could kind of give the countryside a little bit of a break from war. He also wanted to take the war, which this is kind of the other end of the same coin, he wanted to take the war to the Union populace and have them kind of feel a little bit of the sting of war. At the moment, that moment being, before this invasion, the Northern populace, they were certainly impacted by war in the sense of economic problems, dead relatives and friends. It's not to say that there was no impact whatsoever, but the immediate cannonballs exploding out your window kind of impact was not something that was very often felt in the war. Now, the North had been invaded before this point. In fact, even by Robert E. Lee. He made an incursion into Maryland in 1862, a year prior. Famous Battle of Antietam. But that battle didn't end up doing what Robert E. Lee didn't end up accomplishing, rather, what Robert E. Lee had planned. And so here we are again, him invading the North, this time actually Pennsylvania, right? And again, wanting to bring that conflict to the borders of, to the actual land of the Union, and try and, in giving the Union population a little bit of the taste of war, basically try and get them to reconsider the idea that this war was worth it, right? Maybe when they actually saw firsthand the devastation that war brings, they would be less inclined to fight. That was part of the idea. And the third reason why Robert E. Lee wanted to invade the North is because he had a string of victories, 1861 to 1863. Really, the Army of Northern Virginia in general had, because Lee didn't actually have command of the Army of Northern Virginia when this war first started, or of the Eastern Theater, rather, when this war first started, all the way back at the First Battle of Bull Run and Fort Sumter, etc., right? So, the Confederacy and the Eastern Theater had been landing victory after victory after victory, right? There was obviously First and Second Bull Run. You had Chancellorsville. You had Fredericksburg. You had the Shenandoah Valley campaign. There was, Antietam itself even was fought to a stalemate. It wasn't really a defeat, at least tactically, for the Confederate Army. Fort Sumter obviously was quite successful in the sense that they did actually take the fort. The 7 Days Battle was quite successful, and so on and so forth. So Lee at this point was fairly confident that he could defeat, at least tactically, the Union Army in battle. And frankly, at this point, he had been winning strategically also. So part of the idea in invading the North was that, well, we're going to defeat the North on their own soil, just as we've always done, only it's been on our soil. And in defeating the North on their own soil, effectively what we're going to accomplish is we're going to demoralize, especially if we can manage to destroy the Army of the Potomac, which was a pretty lofty goal, admittedly, but nevertheless, we can manage to demoralize the Northern population. And, just like bringing the war to their doorstep would disincline them to continue fighting, so being demoralized on their own soil with the destruction of their army on their own soil would also leave them disinclined to continue the conflict. And Robert E. Lee was banking on the fact, and I think actually this was largely true, that Northern citizens had less stake in the war than Southern citizens did. It's not to say that Northerners weren't passionate about keeping the Union together, and of course this is post-Emancipation Proclamation, so it's not to say that there wasn't some Northerners who were passionate about freeing the slaves. Colonel Joshua Chamberlain immediately comes to mind as far as that matter is concerned. But it's just a simple matter of human nature. The war was taking place in the South. The group that felt invaded and oppressed was the South. The North, obviously, at this point, does not feel like they're being invaded, does not feel like the war is on their doorstep, does not feel like the cause of the war really directly impacts them. And so, given all of these facts, Lee was confident that if he could strike a massive blow on the Union and their biggest army at that, in the Army of the Potomac, or at least their most popular army, strike a massive blow to the Union on Union soil, that it would demoralize this already kind of disincentivized populace and perhaps cause them to sue for peace. Now, I don't personally think that was a terrible idea at all. However, in reality, it went terribly. It went absolutely awfully. Gettysburg, from a tactical perspective, if you focused on the first 2 days, could really be another Antietam, where it's really more of a stalemate, although strategically, because the Confederacy had a certain goal as far as defeating the Union on Union soil and having to retreat afterwards, you could consider that a loss. So tactically inconclusive, strategic loss. Unfortunately, it didn't just end fortunately for the South, it didn't just end after 2 days. It actually lasted a third day. And after that absolutely miserable decision that was Pickett's charge, Gettysburg was very plainly to be seen henceforth and forevermore as a staggering defeat, and one from which the Army of Northern Virginia really could not recover. They simply did not have the manpower to recover from that kind of a mistake, which is part of the thing that occurs when you're the smaller nation. Your margin for error as the smaller fighting force is just significantly smaller than the larger fighting force, right? And so with that defeat and with how disastrously it went, something like 38,000 casualties over the 3 years for the over the 3 days rather, for the Confederacy alone, which, by the by, that's almost as many. I think that's actually way over the amount of casualties we've had as an American nation in the 21st century. I'm not sure casualty count. I know deaths. We've had about 5,000 in the War on Terror, War in Iraq. And I believe that's the combined number. Somebody can correct me there if I'm wrong. As far as like wounding and captured and stuff like that, I'm not 100% sure. But 38,000 is a huge, huge number. And Gettysburg to this day is the bloodiest battle in American history, if one takes into account the fact that both sides were American, the Confederates and the Union, right? So yada, 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 fast forward to August the 8th, because, of course, all that took place in early July. And because this went so disastrously, and because it really was Lee's fault, as brilliant as he was, this was absolutely his worst mistake, and it was entirely on him. And he was even warned beforehand by subordinates, particularly James Longstreet, that this was a bad idea. He went through with it anyway, realized after the fact that Longstreet was right, and so kind of ashamed of himself and realizing that he probably just cost the Confederacy the war, although there's some debate about that, considering everything that had happened in Vicksburg and how successful the Anaconda Plan was, the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation was in every way really guaranteeing no foreign involvement. France and Britain were not coming to the rescue, right? But regardless, as far as he had felt, and a lot of people to this day still feel, he had basically cost the Confederacy the war, and so he decided to give his letter of resignation. And that is all background for this day in history. August 8th, 1863, General Robert E. Lee sends his letter of resignation to Confederate President Jefferson Davis following the defeat at Gettysburg and the disastrous decision on the third day. Now, Jefferson Davis refused, as I said, and Robert E. Lee would go on to command the Army of Northern Virginia until the end of the war, and actually would go on to have some pretty substantial success on the battlefield. The war itself was downhill from there. But if you study the Overland campaign, Grant versus Lee, it is pretty rare that Grant actually defeated Lee on the battlefield. Grant just understood, being a fairly brilliant strategic mind, that he had the manpower to deal with the incredibly brutal blows that Lee could land on him. You can almost think of it like a boxer who maybe understands his opponent is quicker than him, but that he can take more punches than he can and just wears his opponent down before eventually laying the knockout blow. I think that's a very apt comparison for Grant, and that's the way the war ended up going. Nevertheless, Lee did have some pretty phenomenal success at North Anna and Spotsylvania Courthouse, the Wilderness, even Petersburg ended up having like 2 to 3 casualty numbers in favor of the Confederacy. But of course, Grant was just such a pit bull that none of that stuff mattered anymore. Whereas a previous general like Joe Hooker or George McClellan would have taken those casualties and ran, Grant, again, brilliantly realized, well, I have the manpower, I have the resources to handle this, to take this. And on the flip side, Lee doesn't. Right. And so he can continue to waste himself against me, waste himself away against me. I'm not going to erode, but his eroding force, so to speak, will. And eventually I will come out on top. And that's eventually what ended up happening. Right. But nevertheless, all of that, like I said, is just context surrounding what actually took place on August 8th, 1863, which is Lee giving his letter of resignation to Jefferson Davis. Another interesting fun fact that you'll find if you go the Wikipedia route, right? Go down to the 1860s sort of area of Wikipedia when they have, if you look up a date, they have lists of events that took place on a certain day. And actually on August 8th, 1863, two things happened, and this one just kind of tickled me a little bit. I didn't know as much about it, so that's why I decided not to go forward with this fact, but I'll at least tell you guys a little bit about it anyway. The brute fact, if you will, which is that Tennessee's military governor and future vice president of the United States and future president of the United States, Andrew Johnson, actually freed his personal slaves. They were exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation because if you didn't know, the Emancipation Proclamation actually only applied to Confederate states. So it wasn't an abolishing of slavery or a freeing of slaves per se. Really what it was is a war measure, right? That you could free, the Union Army was ordered at that point to free the slaves in rebel states, thus crippling the Confederate economy and removing from them very valuable resources, right? So Andrew Johnson didn't actually have any obligation to free his personal slaves under the Emancipation Proclamation, but on August the 8th, 1863, he decided to do so anyhow. And actually, as a result, August the 8th is celebrated by some in Tennessee as Emancipation Day. So there you have it. You actually got a bonus fact. 2 facts for the price of 1. At any rate, we have a very interesting program for you guys today. Let me go ahead and get this camera on. We have a very interesting program for you guys today, and I had so many things I wanted to talk about that I will surely be going over the usual hour today. I want to start with the Sydney Sweeney ad campaign from American Eagle. Okay. The Sydney Sweeney ad campaign from American Eagle. Now, if you're not familiar, Sydney Sweeney is a actress, allegedly. Really, it seems like all she does is get naked in front of a camera, and I guess technically she is playing a role, so you got to give her the credit for being an actress. But nevertheless, she is most famous for Euphoria, which I've never seen, but everybody I've heard from tells me it's terrible. But nevertheless, a lot of people apparently liked it. It was quite popular, right? And I don't really know what else she's done, to be honest. Oh, yes, she did that terrible, I'm actually going to be talking about this, that terrible, terrible horror movie, Immaculate, which was really just a giant attack on Christianity and the Christian faith, and the ad campaigns for it are absurd. Anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. But nevertheless, Sydney Sweeney is most famous for being quite willing to take her clothes off. That's really the crux of her fame. And that's not just me saying that, by the way. Numerous news outlets and talk shows and all that have noted this before. Sydney Sweeney is obviously, she would be a popular actress if she was not constantly naked, in the sense that she would still, there'd still be a Wikipedia page and acting credits and all that kind of stuff. But the reason she's become such a cultural icon, it seems, is because she's quite willing to take her clothes off, and a significant number of the male population finds her to be quite beautiful. So, or at least they say so. I got to be honest, because of the fact that I really don't, I suspect that men think women are more beautiful when they don't have their clothes on. If we can just be perfectly frank about it, we're all adults here, right? So, perhaps it is not that she's actually particularly attractive. It's just that she has her clothes off, and now maybe I thought she was okay before, and this hypothetical man now goes, well, maybe she's incredibly attractive. Why? Because she took her clothes off. It's a very doggish kind of look, a piggish, if you will, kind of look at her career. But I think it's largely true. And she's been in a series of ads and ad campaigns over the last 2 years, focusing on her sexuality and her body, right? A Baskin Robbins campaign that was apparently rekindled actually recently. So there's that. There was a Dr. Squatch soap ad campaign. Their slogan was "For men who prefer natural," which I think you all know. You can read between the lines. Again, we're all adults. I think you all know what that means. And then most recently, this American Eagle campaign. Now, I'm not going to show you images from the American Eagle campaign. It's not like it's incredibly grotesque in terms of sexuality, but it is clearly meant to be sexualized. And actually, perhaps just to give you an idea, we'll give one photo because, like I said, it's not like it's pornographic or anything like that, but just to give you kind of an idea here, I already have it pulled up. I might as well. This is the kind of thing she's doing, right? Obviously, provocative pose, prominent cleavage, all that other kind of stuff. We can go ahead and get that off the screen now that you guys have some context. And the ad campaign said Sydney Sweeney has good genes, and it was supposed to be kind of a double entendre play on words, right? Because the idea being that she was wearing good jeans, as in denim fabric, right? Obviously, in that picture, you can see she's wearing a jean jacket and obviously just regular jean pants, right? And American Eagle is a jean company. So you can see where, they have this idea, well, she has good genes, as in she's wearing our jeans are good. Hey, buy our jeans, right? It was also kind of a play on the fact that she is attractive, right? People are saying she has good genes, as in good genetics. You see what I'm saying? And so they're kind of doing a little bit of a double entendre there. It's obviously, it's in poor taste. It's not the kind of commercial that we should be seeing on television. More on that in a moment. But nevertheless, that was as far as it went. It's nothing any different than what Baskin Robbins had already done, or Dr. Squatch had already done, or what Carl's Jr. did for such a long period of time, and so on and so forth, right? Except a lot of liberals got a hold of that content, got a hold of their pearls, clutched them ever so furiously, and said, oh, good genes is actually a racist dog whistle because she's blonde hair, blue-eyed, white. So what they mean by good genes is that blonde hair, blue-eyed, white is beautiful. And of course, a bunch of conservatives immediately jumped on this. Number one, because that's retarded and get over yourself. And number two, because there's obviously nothing wrong with being blonde hair, blue-eyed, and white. It's not the only way that somebody can be attractive, but certainly people who are blonde hair, blue-eyed, white, whether male or female, can be attractive. It's just a stupid thing to get angry about, right? And it's stupid for both reasons. Number one, just get over yourself. It's an ad campaign. As far as like the fury in the race thing, right? You guys have to find racism and fascism behind everything. It's stupid. And then on the other end, just the implication there that there's something wrong with the fact that she's blonde hair, blue-eyed, white, right? And a lot of conservatives started jumping on that. And you've heard tons and tons of people. Ben Shapiro's talked about it. Matt Walsh has talked about it. Charlie Kirk has talked about it. Stephen Crowder's talked about it. Cross-politic guys have talked about it a little bit. Officer Tatum has talked about it. Doug Wilson has talked about it, right? It's just been, it is Babylon Bee continues to talk about it nonstop. It's like every single article they're posting has something to do with this stupid Sydney Sweeney ad campaign. And the reason conservatives jumped on it is to own the libs, right? And if you watch this show, then you know that I am probably farther to the right than virtually anybody you know, right? I am hardcore, dyed-in-the-wool, constitutionalist, traditionalist, nationalist. I make no bones about it. I am not ashamed of it. which is why I am so frustrated with this turn of events. Okay. And it seems to be a consistent problem with the right post 2015 when Donald Trump announced his presidency. Who could have predicted that? Oh, wait, I did. And so did everybody else with a brain, right? Obviously, we are supportive of people's freedom of speech. Okay. Obviously, I don't think that like pornography and stuff like that is necessarily free speech, but that's not what Sydney Sweeney is doing, admittedly. I mean, the ad campaign is not pornography. So I'm not going as far as to say like somebody should be making this illegal or something like that. So I don't want anybody to get confused there. But as conservatives, one of the things we're supposed to be conserving is public decorum, modesty, decency, honor, and so on and so forth. The Christian faith being the overarching theme in all of those things. The Christian faith being the very thing that this nation and its values are built upon, I might add, right? That is the crux of what it means to be a conservative, right? And we have always been I don't want to say party because that implies like the Republican Party, and I'm not necessarily talking about parties per se, but ideologies and movements, right? That has always been the central theme, it seems, of the conservative movement, right? When the sexual revolution took place, it was the conservatives saying, no, it's not okay for women to dress provocatively outside like that. No, it's not okay for people to be wearing bikinis on the beaches. No, it's not okay to be getting divorced. No, it's not okay to be having abortions. No, it's not okay to have loose sexual morals and be promiscuous and these kinds of things. Adultery should be prosecuted. Homosexuality is a sin. Transgenderism is a sin. Pornography is a sin, etc. Right? That was the conservatives the whole way down. And as it pertained to things like drug use and all that other kind of stuff, that was also the conservative movement that was fighting against these things. And obviously, there's some variation of opinion in some of those things. Like I, for example, am for the legalization of marijuana. I think that it's completely ridiculous to put somebody in prison for smoking a plant. Whether or not that means you should smoke the plant is obviously a different question. But there's room for debate is what I mean, within reason in these circles. But we have always been the group that was high on morals, that wanted to preserve decency, that wanted to portray the Christian faith in a positive and moral and decent light. And that is just not true anymore. That is just not true anymore. And this ad campaign has become yet another example of the fact that conservatives, so-called, because these people are not conservative, okay? Not socially, not economically, not constitutionally. They just simply are not conservatives. Trumpism may be farther to the right of the commies that run the Democratic Party, but it is certainly not conservatism, right? It's certainly to the left of where I am. It's certainly to the left of where George W. Bush was in the year 2000. And George W. Bush wasn't even really that far to the right, to be honest with you. I don't think I would vote for George W. Bush if given almost any other option as far as who he ran against, Pat Buchanan, Alan Keyes, and Dan Quayle, right? In the year 2000, we're all better candidates. I digress. And you could add Howard Phillips to that too, U.S. Constitution Party. I digress, though. These so-called conservatives have, in the last, 10 years, 2015, since Trump decided to run. First off, endorsed Trump himself. When there was other options, by the way. People always want to say, well, what about, it was either him or Clinton. It was him or Kamala. It was him or Biden. Yeah, that's not true, though. It's never actually been true. If you don't know how the political system in this country works, that's fine. The American education system has failed everybody. That's part of the reason why I think a whole bunch of people should not be voting, to be honest. But nevertheless, we have these things called primaries every single election cycle, where a whole bunch of people run for the nomination of a certain party. So, for example, in 2016, Ted Cruz ran, Ben Carson ran, Rand Paul ran, Mike Huckabee ran. All of those dudes would have been perfectly acceptable presidents, genuine conservatives, some more so than others, some less so than others, but nevertheless. In the case of guys like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, they were even still anti-establishment conservatives. I think a lot of people forget just how hated Ted Cruz and Rand Paul were, coming from slightly different angles. Ted from a more traditionalist, constitutionalist angle, and Rand from a more still constitutionalist, but a little bit more libertarian than traditionalist angle. Digression aside, though, the point is the establishment neocons in 2016 hated both of them. So you could have even still gotten that. You still could have gotten all of the things you love about Trump, like the anti-political correctness, like the America First bravado, like the anti-media, anti-establishment, anti-corruption agenda, which apparently Trump doesn't even actually have, right? Given everything that we've seen with Epstein and all that kind of stuff. You still could have gotten all that with any of those two candidates. And while you wouldn't have gotten that necessarily with Carson or Huckabee, you still would have gotten good conservative governance. They were still not neoconservatives, in other words. They were not neocons. They were not establishment conservatives, even if they weren't necessarily despised by establishment conservatives the way Paul Cruz and admittedly Trump were, right? And even after that moment in 2016, you could always have voted for somebody like Darrell Castle or a third-party candidate. And when everybody says, oh, yeah, but third-party candidates can't win, yeah, that's because you don't vote for them, right? If people decided to vote for third-party candidates, guess what? They would win. You want to know how I know that? Because the Republican Party was once a third party, and now they're not. Now they're one of the two in the two-headed beast. It's kind of amazing how that works, right? If you vote for people, they get elected. It's a wild thought. Anyways, since that time, we have endorsed Donald Trump, thrice married, cheated on all three of his wives, his last wife being a softcore porn star who he cheated on with a hardcore porn star, right? He was running beauty pageants that were incredibly provocative. He was admitted himself not a Christian, foul-mouthed, and all this other kind of stuff. And to boot, not actually conservative in terms of policy. After that, there was Caitlyn Jenner, who was endorsed by a whole bunch of people, who is a man, okay? I'll call the dude Caitlyn if he wants. He has a right to change his name, I suppose. But he is a man, okay? And we had a whole bunch of conservatives endorsing him for governor of California in 2018. A lot of people forgot about that. I can't remember the name of the woman, but we had a whole bunch of people livid with Charlie Kirk that he didn't want a porn star, a hardcore porn star, at his Turning Point USA conference. I can't remember what year that was either, but it was during the first term, and a bunch of people were furious about it. We've had endorsements of Amber Rose, who, of course, has an OnlyFans, is a softcore porn star, is particularly famous for twerking in music videos, formerly being a stripper, and running the slut walk, which is not a euphemism, by the way. That's what she and the rest of them decided to call it, is a slut walk, where a bunch of women get together and dress as slutty as they possibly can in the name of feminism or something. I don't know, right? And conservatives decided to endorse that. And conservatives decided to endorse prayers to Wahaguru at the Republican National Convention. And conservatives decided to endorse pagans in the party, like Vivek Ramaswamy, right? and conservatives decided to endorse consistently naked actresses like Mindy Robinson. And this is what conservatives became. This is what conservatives turned into. And it's not like the left left that, by the way. A bunch of people want to act like, well, this is just a return to normalcy, right? First off, if that's what normalcy is, then normal is not good. Now, I would posit to you that that is not normalcy, but if that is what normalcy is, for sake of argument, then normal is not a good thing, okay? But it's not as if the liberals have actually been anti-sex and that kind of stuff this entire time, or anti-religious pluralism this entire time, or anti-homosexuality and transgenderism this entire time. That's not what happened. You know what I mean? Like, they still have Pete Hegseth, and they still have Cardi B, and they still have their own connections to Jeffrey Epstein, and they still do their little slut walks, and they still have all their OnlyFans models. And the only difference between you objectifying a woman, like what everybody is currently claiming is going on with Sydney Sweeney, and a woman being empowered by taking her clothes off, is which side she's on, frankly. If Sydney Sweeney was a liberal, then this would be empowering. And if she's, since right now she's a darling of the Republican Party, well, then that means it's degrading. Of course, it's actually degrading either time, but you get my point, right? And conservatives have decided you notice I titled this Conservatitsm, right, have decided that actually that's what we're fighting. What we're really fighting for is the right for white women to show off their boobs. That's what we're fighting for. What we're really fighting for is for homosexuality and transgenderism to dominate the culture so long as it comes with an elephant tattoo rather than a donkey. What we're really fighting for is prayers to pagan gods, so long as those prayers to pagan gods are at least giving lip service to the idea of Americana rather than being explicitly pro open border and stuff like that. And it just begs the question, what do you even mean by conservative? What are you conserving? You're not conserving culture. You're not conserving morals. You're not conserving institutions. You're not conserving decorum. You're not conserving the Christian faith. You're not conserving our values. What are you conserving? Because the conservative of yesteryear, the William F. Buckley and the Pat Buchanan and the Ron Paul and even the Ted Cruz, right? That guy doesn't exist anymore in terms of the mainstream political party. Now, obviously, individuals, I just named Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, Ben Carson. Obviously, individuals do exist who are still trying to teach this kind of a message. But in terms of mainstream Republican Party politics, that guy has no sway. That guy has no power. We have just gotten to the point where we are down with the sexual revolution. Conservatives are no longer fighting against the sexual revolution. We're waving our own sexual revolution flag. And whereas the liberal sexual revolution flag has a black woman like Cardi B on it, our sexual revolution flag has a white woman like Sydney Sweeney on it. And so therefore that makes it better and different, I guess, somehow. It's actually, it's weird. You know what I mean? It's like, it's more race politics, frankly. It's just now it's coming from both sides. And I am so disheartened at these developments because I've said before the culture war is lost. And if anything, we're looking for cultural revival and a cultural revolution. But I think even knowing that, seeing it happen so consistently, especially now that I'm a dad, is just so disheartening. You know what I mean? It's like we're not winning anything. We're just consistently ceding ground to the liberals over and over and over again. Hell, our party is run by them at this point. Our party, quote unquote. Trump, Tulsi, Kennedy, Musk, they're all former Democrats as of like 5 years ago. In the case of Trump, I guess 8 years ago, right? Wasn't that long ago, though, that these guys were actually on the other side of us, supporting the Hillary Clintons and the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes and the Bill Clintons and the John Kerrys and the Al Gores and etc. of the world, right? Now, all of a sudden, they're running our party. Okay, I guess that's just a thing that we're going to be all okay with. And we're just going to start endorsing guys like Herschel Walker and Mehmet Oz and Sydney Sweeney and Donald Trump and Amber Rose. And those are going to be our leaders. Those are going to be the guys we put forward to speak at our conferences, who we have as our darlings in the media, who we have running for president or for senator or for governor, right? That's just what we're going to go with because we think their policies are slightly better, kind of, and emphasis on kind of, because to be honest with you, Trump's not accomplishing a lot of the things he promised he would accomplish, okay? They're just slightly better, kind of, than the alternative. Instead of a pair of Mexican boobs, it's a pair of white boobs, and apparently that makes it different. I'm going to tell you, friends, it doesn't make it different. And from a scriptural perspective, if I can get on my soapbox and preach for a minute, I know that this isn't actually a religious channel, but it's my channel, and I'm going to do whatever I feel like. From a religious perspective, it is just as sinful if the boobs being paraded on national television are white boobs as it is when they are black or Mexican boobs, or white boobs with blue hair, or white boobs with blonde hair that happen to vote Democrat. Because let's be honest, if Sydney Sweeney was not being considered the darling right now of the Republicans, it would be all the liberals defending her. How do I know that? Well, because they were 2 years ago. The exact same woman. More on that in a moment, right? From a scriptural perspective, it is just as sinful when it's Sydney Sweeney as it is when it's Cardi B. The Bible says plainly, by the by, it does not mince words in this regard. The Bible says to even look upon a woman with lust in your heart is to commit adultery with her. right? That's what Scripture says. That's what our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ says. The Bible says that women are to dress modestly. You can see 2 Timothy for that. That's what the Bible says. That's what Scripture says, right? Excuse me, I'm going to drink here on my tea. The Bible talks at length about the negatives of playing the harlot and of falling for that, by the way, being the harlot on the male side, right? So don't sit up here with your cross and start defending Christian values, okay? If you're just going to turn around and say, well, at least guys like Andrew Tate and Sydney Sweeney are sinning in the right direction, which is an actual quote people have actually said on their actual platforms, just to be clear, okay? And also, for the record, let's dive in a little bit to some of the stuff that Sydney Sweeney has done, because it's, like I said, it's not as if she's been a beacon of conservatism up until this point. I guess recently it was revealed that she does register Republican and is into guns, which I guess that just solves everything, right? Let me show you here a advertisement for a Sydney Sweeney movie that not only did she star in, but she actually bankrolled. She was the producer here. She wanted this to be out into the world, right? Let her see a little. Let you guys see a little bit about what she thinks about you stupid, dumb little Christian, you. And I understand this is somebody who's going to say, well, yeah, that's Catholics. It's not Christian. You got to understand from the perspective of the world, it's the same thing. We understand it's different. They don't. They're insulting Christ because they're insulting Christ. They're not just going after the Catholic Church specifically because, quite frankly, they aren't that smart. But anyway, check this out. This is just one of the many videos, right? This one being the trailer for this movie, Immaculate, that, again, not only did she star in, but she actually bankrolled. Let's watch.
God saved me for a reason, but I'm still searching for what that reason is.
Fair warning, it is a horror movie, so there will be some jump scares in the trailer and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure that you guys can handle it.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hello? I know God saved me for a reason, but I guess I'm still searching for what that reason is.
Too much blood of Christ. It's a miracle. You are with child.
Out of all the women in the world, why did he choose me?
How can we trust what's inside you? Suffering. You should love. Suffering. 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 You should love.
All right, if you didn't catch some of the imagery and story there, perhaps it went over your head. That's perfectly fine. Allow me to explain. You may notice immaculate from the phrase immaculate conception. Now, immaculate conception does actually refer to Mary. Nevertheless, Jesus is said to be immaculately conceived also. And you may have picked up on the fact that the point of this story is that she has a forced pregnancy said to be miraculous, the child in her being some kind of a demon spawn rather than actually Jesus or a Messiah, right? And she is being forced to keep that pregnancy to term against her will, which, of course, is supposed to show the danger of religious extremism, patriarchal control, and the context of why reproductive rights should be so important. It's a pro-abortion film that uses Christianity as a backdrop to talk about how basically negative it is, right? It also has quite a bit of blasphemous imagery and themes in it. For example, you just saw the name is immaculate. Obviously, the whole concept of it is a virgin birth. You may notice this is very clearly representative of the Madonna. And look, we're not Catholics. We don't think that the Virgin Mary is like some goddess to pray to. She is still a saint, and we wouldn't be happy with anybody depicting Moses this way, or anybody depicting Peter this way, or anybody depicting Elijah this way, right? This imagery is clearly meant to evoke the Virgin Mary, only in a twisted kind of sense where she's actually being forced against her will to carry a demon child, and this is the dangers of the patriarchy, and we should all be pro-abortion. And by the way, this did come out in 2022, right after Jackson v. Dobbs. You think that's a coincidence? Because it's not, right? And when Miss Sweeney was confronted about how blasphemous some of this stuff was, her response was not to say, no, you guys are reading too much into it. You guys are going out of your way to make this look worse than it actually is. Hey, we're actually, using the Bible as inspiration, something like that, right? Anything that you could say to try and tamper or diminish rather concerns that Christians were having. No, it was nothing like that. Her response was, let me show you. Let's go ahead and share screen yet again to show part of the advertising campaign that Sydney Sweeney engaged in for this movie, Immaculate, that again, she funded. I would like to point out for the court already that she is obviously dressed sensually in the sense that she's in a low-cut shirt. It's lace. The dress is very clearly near see-through, etc. And you notice she has this big giant Bible in her hands. All right, let's see.
2 Kings chapter 2, verses 23 to 24. From there, Elijah went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of town and jeered at him. "Get out of here, Baldy," they said. "Get out of here, Baldy." He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys.
Now, first of all, I'd just like to point out that it's actually Elisha. It's not Elijah, but not that she cares. Do we think that reading that story without any context, without any explanation, just picking it up, reading it, shutting your Bible, looking all pompously at the screen like that, do we think that was meant to appreciate Scripture? Was that meant to illuminate what God has told his people? Was that meant to portray Christianity in a positive light? Or maybe, is it possible that she chose one of the areas that would definitely get people all grumpy? Oh, is that really in the Bible? Right? As a ad for her movie. She's using sex appeal, blasphemy, and deliberate misrepresentation of Scripture, in the sense that she's cutting off context. She's not trying to go out and explain anything, certainly, right? To try and make a buck. That's the conservatives' new darling right there. Making a pro-abortion blasphemy movie while being sexed out, right? And when being criticized, hey, this is clearly blasphemous, and also you basically play a softcore porn star on television, saying, oh, you have a problem with what I do? Well, this is what your precious Bible says. And we've just decided we're cool with that. That's the person. And by the way, there's a whole series of these Sydney Sweeney Reads the Bible things. I have no intention on showing you all of them because, frankly, it's just not relevant. That's just something we're cool with now. We've just decided that we are down with the softcore porn thing. We're down with the blasphemy thing. We're down with the mocking of our scriptures thing. Why? Oh, because it owns the libs, bro. Don't you want to own the libs, bro? Hey, at least it's better than some fat tranny lady on there, bro. It owns the libs, bro. Yeah, I'm sorry. If it comes at the expense of Christ and his influence in this culture, I don't care about owning the libs. Okay? It's like you have a tumor and you decide the best way to get rid of the tumor is to shoot myself. Well, yeah, I guess technically you did kill the tumor. Good on you, Mr. Corpse. But you didn't actually accomplish anything. Okay? That is essentially what we have going down here, and everybody's just cool with it. Nobody's going out and criticizing. In fact, and I love Doug Wilson. We're even going to talk a little bit about Doug Wilson later on. Even Doug Wilson criticized it a little, but made the point, well, this is at least closer to the kingdom than what we get before. I don't understand how he thinks that's true. How do you think, like, where did we get this idea that the liberals, first off, are anti even normal sex? They're not. They just also happen to be pro all the crazy sex. But the liberals are still pro normal sex also. The liberals, in fact, that's the only part of femininity the liberals like, is sex. They don't like dresses. They don't like submission to husband. They don't like being a mother. They don't like staying at home. Anything that has to do with femininity is bad, except for the part where you have your boobs out. That's actually positive femininity, according to the liberals. The only reason this one's different is because a lot of people got mad about the jeans comment. And again, I agree. It was stupid. The liberals are retarded by nature. We don't disagree there. But you are selling your soul for a cup of liberal tears. And I'm telling you, brother, it ain't that sweet. We are at forget a crossroads. We are dying as a nation. And yes, we're dying on many fronts. We're dying because of the border. I agree. We're dying because of crime. I agree. The economy sucks. I agree. The political class is just woefully corrupt, and it seems like a lot of them are in bed with pedophiles. I agree. Yes, there are big issues. But you know what the biggest issue is that surrounds all of them? Christlessness. Christlessness. That is the issue. And this faux conservatism that has slutwalkers speak at the Republican National Convention and makes a darling out of blasphemous softcore porn stars is not going to fix that problem. You cannot simultaneously criticize promiscuous sex outside of marriage and then put up a poster of Sydney Sweeney with her boobs hanging out. That's just not how things work. And I'm sorry that I have to tell you that, but unfortunately, a lot of you have bonked your head and got a nice little welt up there, the size of which could only be properly described in a Looney Tunes cartoon. Y'all are dumb. I'm hoping that my audience is not dumb, but unfortunately, if there are members of my audience who are part of this crusade of pro-sex conservatism, yeah, you're an idiot. And you're also evil, actually. Worse than being an idiot, you're actually evil. The sexual objectification of women is not a conservative value. That is a progressive value. It's part of how we got here. They didn't start with letting men into women's bathrooms. They didn't start with praising fat chicks at your local teen beauty pageant. They started with, it should be okay to wear booty shorts and star in pornography. That's what they started with. Okay? And now we're gleefully going down that same path, and it's ending up exactly where it ended up with them, which is why we have, and God bless them, I don't have any ill will towards any of these people, but why we have quote-unquote conservatives like Amber Rose, and like Sydney Sweeney, and like Dave Rubin, and like Shane Dawson, and like Jeffree Star, I think is his name, and Caitlyn Jenner, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. The first openly gay-affirming president in the history of the United States was Donald Trump first term. Fun fact. And then we just sit here and we're shocked. Oh, I can't believe that the culture is so Christless. Well, you're Christless. You're not operating either in a Christian or in a conservative manner. Maybe if you were, they would have something to look to, but you're so focused on owning the libs and on drinking the liberal tears and all of that bullshit, excuse my French, that if it means sacrificing your values at the altar of Sydney Sweeney's tits, you're perfectly fine with it. Well, I'm not perfectly fine with it. And in fact, I'm infuriated. And frankly, if this is what American conservatism is, then American conservatism does not exist. It's not real. There's no such thing as a sex-positive conservative. That's not a real thing. Frankly, there's no such thing as a Christless conservative. To all the Christless conservatives out there, they're just progressives that are slightly behind the curve. And right now, our party, there we go, is dominated by progressives who are slightly behind the curve. Sorry. You don't like that, then maybe do something to change it. Right now, it seems like a lot of you guys aren't interested in changing it. Right now, it seems like a lot of you guys are just interested, like I said, in owning the libs. And if owning the libs is what you think the meaning of life is, well, first of all, that's a fairly easy look. It's not even difficult. They made a jeans joke for crying out loud and managed to own the libs. Okay? Liberals are stupid by nature. It's real easy to do. Literally just do normal things and they will get offended at you. But also, if that's actually what you think the peak of American culture and Americana and conservatism is, well, more power to you. It's a free country. You're welcome to do what you want. You are welcome to make your bed in the fiery embers of hell that America is soon turning into. And I'm not talking about that in the sense of like you're necessarily going to hell. But this country is. This country is going to hell in a handbasket. And it seems like conservatives are just happy to just stoke those flames, throw some oil on it. It's no big deal. Hey, our oil is white and has blue eyes, so therefore it's different than their oil. As if Sydney Sweeney wasn't just being defended by the liberals 2 minutes ago. Anyway, spitting off a long time on that subject, let's jump to a different subject because we're not going to stick to our usual hour today. A lot of very interesting natural phenomenon taking place. Natural disasters, but some of them aren't necessarily disasters. Just things I wanted to talk about a little bit because it's quite fascinating. And it may end up meaning something here in the near future. We'll see what ends up happening. So recently there was an earthquake in Russia, an 8.8 magnitude earthquake, which my understanding is, I am by no means an earthquake expert, but my understanding is that is actually one of the top 5 largest earthquakes in recorded history. Now, that doesn't mean in history necessarily. It just means that as far as what we've recorded, right? And there's been some interesting results or effects, rather, that have come from that earthquake. And so that's kind of what I want to get into with you guys now. So you have this 8.8 earthquake, and this earthquake caused a parade of volcanic eruptions, according to experts. Another article here from Live Science says a parade of volcanoes is erupting in Russia following an 8.8 earthquake. You can see they're both referencing the same expert, hence the reason why they're using the same language. This volcano, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, but a volcano in the Kamchatka Peninsula became active for the first time in 500 years after this 8.8 earthquake. There were tsunami warnings in the west coast of America and in Hawaii. Thank God nothing actually ended up taking place. But very, very interesting stuff. And let's go ahead and I want to show you guys this video here. It is, I mean,
in eastern Russia, more of nature's power on display. A volcano Russian scientists say was dormant 600 years, erupted overnight. Hours later, an earthquake triggered tsunami warnings. Scientists say both events may be connected to last week's 8.8 magnitude quake in the region.
Now, of course, that the main reason for giving you guys the video there is just to show you the volcano erupting. It is kind of cool,
Screaming,
like I said.
yelling.
Obviously, you know, the awesome power of God's creation is a sight to behold. There is no doubt about that. But it's just fascinating. We've been waiting for some time, and by we, I mean the world, have been waiting for some time for what they have called the big one to hit on the American West Coast, or at least somewhere on the Ring of Fire. Seismologists in 2014 said that it was almost a guarantee that within 30 years of that moment, which of course would be 2044, we would end up seeing a incredibly massive earthquake somewhere on the on the Ring of Fire. And a lot of those people were predicting that would happen somewhere either in the Cascadia subduction zone, which is in Washington and Oregon, or also on Western Canada, or the San Andreas Fault down there in Southern California. Of course, this has been fodder for those who are saying it's the end of the world as we know it, and they may or may not feel fine about it, but regardless, the point is this seems like it could, at the very least, if it's not that quake, because 8.8 is a massive earthquake, could be indicative of that quake coming faster than we realize. And I, for one, because I do believe in divine judgment, do happen to think that it's very possible that earthquake will end up striking the American West Coast, considering the fact that the American West Coast is probably the most debauched region, not only in the world today, but in the world ever. Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, all being on that same coast. It's kind of outstanding, actually, to think that Vegas isn't the coast, obviously, but it's close enough. It's kind of amazing, actually, to think about just how much debauchery takes place in the American West, right? And like I said, this earthquake ended up resulting in a good deal of other interesting things, such as tsunami warnings, a second quake that itself had more tsunami warnings. No tsunami took place, thank God. A bunch of volcanoes starting to become active, including this one that was dormant for 600 years. 5 additional volcanoes besides this, and so it's just fascinating. And I just wanted to read a little bit about it and give you guys the scoop. So this massive magnitude 8.8 earthquake that struck off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula last week has triggered the activity of 7 volcanoes. The other article said 6, so my apologies. According to the Institute of Volcanology and Seismology of the Far Eastern branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences, or RAS. The RAS said this is the first time in almost 300 years, that 7 volcanoes erupted at once in the region. The director of the institute, Alexei Ozerov, described the situation as an extremely rare phenomenon that can be described as a parade of volcanic eruptions, end quote. The magnitude 8.8 earthquake that struck late on July 29th caused several aftershocks, including a magnitude 6 aftershock in the Pacific Ocean near Kamchatka at 6 a.m. local time Tuesday morning, that Tuesday being about a week and a half ago from this point, or about a week ago, rather, from this point. But I digress. Well, let's see. Actually, about 3 days ago. It's only Friday. Sorry. About 3 days ago. Local time Tuesday morning, according to the Kamchatka branch of the United Geophysical Service of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Among those erupting is you can pronounce that. I'm not even going to try, but this word right here, the long K word volcano, which the Kamchatka Volcanic Eruption Response Team reported to be spewing ash on Tuesday. The earthquake has now caused the southern part of the Kamchatka Peninsula to shift southeastward, according to the local branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences Unified Geophysical Service. And there's another photo there of the volcano. That's the long K word volcano that I'm not even going to try and pronounce. Like I said, it's quite a sight to behold, even if it is kind of terrifying to think about the potential implications of this volcano and of the earthquake that kind of caused everything here. But it is quite the sight to behold, right? God's creation is immensely powerful and incredibly awesome. Digressions aside. The Kamchatka branch of the Federal Research Center, quote, United Geophysical Service of the Russian Academy of Sciences, have calculated the surface of the Earth shifted to the southeast, with the greatest shift occurring in the south of the peninsula, reaching about 2 meters, which is kind of ridiculous. I don't know the exact conversion of meter to feet, but I'm fairly certain a meter is roughly a yard, which would mean 2 meters would be roughly 6 feet. And I actually think it'd be over 6 feet, but don't quote me on that. Just kind of incredible, though. The greatest shift occurred in the south of the peninsula, a movement that is comparable to the horizontal displacement, that resulted from the 2011 earthquake in Japan. That's the Fukushima one, if you guys don't recall. Seismologists acknowledge the peninsula has shifted somewhat more modestly, although they do not specify the exact amount. The eruptions follow the volcanic activity of the Long K-word volcano, which saw lava flow in the last week for the first time in nearly 600 years. Local officials said the last lava flow was recorded in 1463, so not exactly 300 years, closer to 400 or 560 rather. But you get the idea. A Russian seismologist told local media that there is a direct connection between last week's powerful earthquake and increased volcanic activity in Kamchatka. Quote, we attribute the eruptions to the earthquake, which activated the magmatic foci, sorry, not a scientist, and provided them with additional energy, end quote. Alexei Ozerov, a corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences and director of the Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, told TASS, a state-affiliated media in Russia. The Long K volcano is located less than 150 miles away from the epicenter of the earthquake that struck off the east coast of the Russian peninsula on July 29th. The intense earthquake was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded and the world's largest since 2011. It spurred tsunami warnings from Japan to Hawaii and the west coast of the United States. Again, thank the Lord, none of that ended up actually resulting in anything serious taking place. This image, by the by, let me just take a second to acknowledge, this is like one of the coolest images I've ever seen in my life. Again, this is a serious topic. I want to give it its due credit. But talk about an awesome picture, right? Whoever took this picture needs like some kind of an award or something, because that is just one of the coolest pictures I've ever seen in my life. I hope you guys can get a good look at it. Volcanic activity is common for the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is home to 29 active volcanoes, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, with 3 of those currently erupting, previously laying dormant, according to the RAS, which that, by the by, is the major note. It's not that there's volcanoes going off in this region. It's which specific ones are going off in this region, which happens to be a fairly depopulated region. Again, thank the Lord. Massive eruptions began at 6 a.m. local time on Sunday, prompting the evacuation of personnel in the area, according to Kronotsky Nature Reserve's website. The Regional Ministry of Emergency Situations says there is no settlements along the ash plumes path of the Long K, and said there is no registered tourist group in the volcano's vicinity. So that has been the first development here. And again, the reason this is interesting for us is because scientists have long been expecting there to be some kind of major volcanic activity, major seismic activity on the American West Coast, or generally on the Ring of Fire, but specifically on the American West Coast. They've been expecting this now for a little over a decade. They said about a decade ago, 2014, that we can expect this quote-unquote big one within the next 30 years, which at this point, being that it's 2025, would be within the next 20 years. And if we do end up seeing an earthquake in a highly populated area like Los Angeles or Portland that hits 9.0 or higher, that could be incredibly devastating to the economy and the local population, and in fact likely would be. And you know, it's fascinating to me. I started this off talking about Christless conservatism and Sydney Sweeney and all this other kind of stuff. And at the same time that all of this is going on, we see these reports of natural disasters that could potentially have a massive and detrimental impact on the American West Coast. And I don't want to sound like, you know, Rorschach, if you're familiar with the comic Watchmen, Rorschach sits there in the background when he's not in costume with a sign that says the end is nigh. And I don't want to sound like the kook with the sign that says the end is nigh, but at the same time, you got to admit it's kind of peculiar. And even if we don't think this is some kind of judgment from God, which I think is unlikely considering how debased our society has gotten, but I digress. Even if we don't think this is some kind of judgment from God, at the very least, we do have to say, hey, there's something pretty spectacular going on the Ring of Fire right now. And it would not be a bad idea for us to be vigilant in watching it and for us to be prepared if we happen to live near that region for something to take place. I personally do think, because these guys are experts in the field, they know what they're talking about, that timetable for a major seismic action taking place on the American West Coast is probably accurate. Now, does this recent earthquake mean that it's going to happen sometime within the next couple of days? Well, no, not necessarily. And being a praying man myself, I would advise you guys to pray that it doesn't happen. Lord, show mercy unto us, your people. Show mercy to those in LA and Hawaii and Japan and so on. Be like Abraham. Lord, if there are even 10 righteous in the city, will you destroy the city for lack of 10? Right? And of course, God knows. God is all wise. God is all sovereign. God is all powerful. He knows when there is the less than 10, so to speak, or when it's too far gone. He knows what's right is the point. But we should certainly be in prayer, hoping that this doesn't happen soon. But from a strictly humanistic perspective, temporally, earthbound, it seems like it will happen soon. And there is definitely a lot of pretty crazy activity on the Ring of Fire at the moment, both in terms of seismology and in terms of volcanology. And by the by, scientists have also said that a major earthquake fault line has started up, and they believe it is kind of connected to this recent activity in the Kamchatka Peninsula. This is from Time magazine, July 29th, the same day that massive earthquake took place in Kamchatka. Scientists believe this major earthquake fault line is waking up. High up in Canada's Yukon Territory, a seismic gun is being cocked and aimed at the little community of Dawson City, population 1,600. If a new study in the journal Geophysical Research Letters is correct, that town, or one of many others in the region, could be rocked by a major earthquake pretty much at any moment. The source of the danger is a 1,000 kilometer or 620 mile formation known as the Tintina Fault, and that cuts northwest through the Yukon and terminates in Alaska. It has been mostly still for the last 12,000 years, so they say. I'm obviously a young Earth creationist, so I don't know if it goes back that far, but digressions aside. But it appears to be getting ready to lurch to life. Quote, over the past couple of decades, there have been a few small earthquakes of magnitude 3 to 4 detected along the Tintina Fault, but nothing to suggest it is capable of large ruptures, end quote, said Theron Finlay, a recent PhD graduate at Canada's University of Victoria, and the lead author of the study in a statement. That's not the full story, though. Finlay says what the last 2 decades suggest and what the geophysical record now shows are two different things. And according to the paper, Tintina is a lot more menacing than it seems. Now, as a quick note, if you're not familiar with where the Yukon is, you kind of are actually given some of the information here, right? I think everybody in America knows where Alaska is, certainly. And I'm going to show you here a picture of the Ring of Fire so you guys can kind of get an idea of where this all is. But the Yukon is bordering Canada's east, right? So we're talking about an area fairly close to that whole region. Now, let me give you this photo here. It's not a photo, but picture. So you guys can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. I wish these pictures would just blow up and get bigger. There we go. All right. So this region right about here, right above this red mark, is where Tintina is. Okay. This, of course, being California. You see it doesn't actually mark it for you, but the Cascadia subduction zone is right about here, going up into British Columbia all the way down to Oregon. The San Andreas Fault starts right about here, where Baja California and the rest of Mexico meet, and goes up to the center of California before eventually going underneath. I think San Francisco would be right about here. So that would be that whole region, and it connects to a little tiny fault that itself connects both Cascadia and San Andreas. And then, of course, that'll go up, and it'll connect to Tintina right up around this region here, right? So that's kind of an idea of where exactly we are at. Let me get another drink here real quick. My apologies. If you don't love tea, I don't know what's wrong with you. By the by, this right here, that's Kamchatka, that little peninsula right here. I don't know if you guys can see where my mouse is, but this little region right here is Kamchatka. Actually, I don't think my screen, now that I'm looking at this, I don't think my screen's being shared. I think it's still on the Google image rather than on the blown up image here. So let me fix that. My apologies. We're a professional operation here, guys. All right. So right about here. So starting right here where Baja California and the rest of mainland Mexico meet is where the San Andreas Fault starts, goes up and then into right about here, which would be the Bay Area, right? San Jose, Oakland, Modesto, San Francisco, etc. There's a little fault here whose name I always forget that connects the San Andreas Fault and the Cascadia subduction zone. And then that Cascadia subduction zone goes from here in Oregon through Portland, by the by, and under Seattle as well, all the way up into British Columbia, right? Now, the Tintina fault is right about here, give or take, right where Alaska and Yukon meet, kind of at the edge of that ring of fire, still connected to everything, but nevertheless a little bit farther off of the coast than everything else here is. And then this peninsula here is Kamchatka, right? And then, of course, with the rest of this red, you see the rest of this so-called ring of fire. So that's the region we're talking about in this article, and you can see how all of these things, the California region, the Oregon region, Kamchatka, Alaska, etc. All you can see how they're all connected here. Anyway, back to the actual article. What caught the interest of Finley and his colleagues is a 130-kilometer or 80-mile segment of the fault that runs near Dawson City, with surface features suggesting that numerous large earthquakes occurred in relatively recent geological history during the Quaternary period, which runs from 2.6 million years ago to the present. To get a better understanding, the researchers used an existing library of high-resolution imagery from airplanes, satellites, and drones, some of them captured by lidar, which uses, or LiDAR, I don't know, to be honest. But anyway, which uses pulsed laser emissions to produce 3D maps of the surface. This allowed them to study the stretch of the fault in unprecedented detail and find a number of geological secrets hiding in plain sight. At one point in the Tintina segment, they discovered a fault scarp, or a rigid crack in the surface where the land broke and shifted 3,280 feet, or 1,000 meters. This is a clear fingerprint of a long series of earthquakes, one that, according to the computer models of the terrain, occurred about 2.6 million years ago. Again, I don't buy the exact dating, but nevertheless, the evidence of a massive earthquake being there is at least, I think, good. At another spot, they found another scarp misaligned by a more modest 250 feet, and they estimated could have been caused by a smaller but still considerable quake that occurred around 132,000 years ago. No evidence of significant quakes turned up at any time in the last 12,000 years, meaning Tintina has been relatively stable throughout the entirety of the Holocene epoch, which runs from about 11,700 years ago to the present. But for modern-day folks living in Dawson and elsewhere, that recent period of quiescence, there we go. That recent period of quiescence is actually bad news. Just because a fault isn't causing quakes doesn't mean it isn't on the move. Finley and his colleagues estimate that Tintina is moving and accumulating strain at the order of 2 to 8 millimeters a year. Over the course of 12,000 years, those millimeters add up, and when the strain is suddenly released, which it ultimately must be, the result is not pretty. Quote, we determined that future earthquakes on the Tintina Fault could exceed magnitude 7.5, end quote, said Finley in a statement. Quote, based on the data, we think that the fault may be a relatively late stage of the seismic cycle, having accrued a slip deficit or buildup of strain of 6 meters, i.e. 20 feet, in the last 12,000 years. If this would be released, it would cause a significant earthquake. That estimated 7.5 magnitude of the quake would put it on scale with some of history's bigger temblors, including China's 1976 Tangshan event, which claimed an estimated 240 to 650,000 lives, and the 2010 Haiti quake, which killed 300,000. Now, of course, there are other factors that go into those two quakes, population density, poor infrastructure, things like that, right? Nevertheless, you get the idea, though. These can be incredibly deadly quakes. The Yukon Territory is much more sparsely populated than Tangshan or Haiti, meaning fewer casualties, but still, there could quite likely be deaths along with damage to local highways, mines, and other infrastructures. The area is also prone to landslides, which could be triggered by a quake. And this is just yet more information regarding recent events at this on these Ring of Fire fault lines. Things appear to be getting a little bit testy. And sorry, I have a baby screaming outside. I just wanted to know what that was about, but it seems like it's all under control. My wife's got it. Anyway, this could, of course, end up being incredibly dangerous, especially considering what we were already talking about, that timetable, right, with the potential quote-unquote big one, 9.0 or higher, taking place at some point here on our own West Coast. And these are not the only strange things taking place, by the by. We have also recently seen the Sea of Galilee turning a kind of bloodish red, which is fascinating and also kind of terrifying. It's not unprecedented. It has happened before, but it's still weird and it's still bizarre, and I still want to talk about it. Culprit turning the world's oceans red has reached Israel. This article is from Wyon News. I'm not actually certain about much considering Wyon, but I have confirmed this via other news sources. So, there you go. The Sea of Galilee in Israel has turned red, scaring people away from entering it. Officials checked the water to see what was wrong and figured out the culprit. The problem has arisen because of climate change and is not limited to Israel. Now, of course, I don't buy into the idea of man-made climate change, but that's not why we're reading the article. Do your best to kind of just put that particular portion of this out of your mind. A freshwater lake in Israel has turned red, causing panic among people in the nearby areas. The Sea of Galilee has taken on a strange hue over the past few days. The lake is a popular tourist attraction in Israel, especially among Christian pilgrims who visit the country to see the places Jesus set foot in. Several people also love taking a dip in the lake. However, the red color has caused a scare in the region. The water ministry inspected the lake and cleared it as safe. It has also revealed the reason for the lake turning red. A green algae called, totally going to pronounce this wrong, sorry, Botryococcus browni, I don't know, is thriving in the lake, giving it a new color. The green algae has turned the water red, as strange as it sounds. Officials say there is a simple explanation for this. According to the ministry, the algae produces a natural pigment when exposed to sunlight, which gets accumulated in certain portions of the lake. It is red in color, lending the lake a mysterious hue. Officials also tested the water to check for safety and assured people that the water in the Sea of Galilee is perfectly fine. And I have no reason to doubt that they are right, that the water is perfectly fine. I do, however, think that this is still incredibly bizarre and strange. Obviously, this is a major religious site, and in the Holy Land, no doubt. And it kind of gives a little bit of it calls a little bit to, if you will, this, the idea of the plagues that took place in ancient Egypt. I am starting to get a little tired. I apologize, guys. Let me go ahead and show you a little bit of a video here so that you get an idea of what we're talking about when it says red. Sea of Galilee red.
Hello, people. Look, I'm in the Galilee Sea. Look, the water is red, like blood. Look at the water. This is a very, very bad omen.
You gotta see there that red cube, right?
Hello, people.
It almost looks fake.
Look,
right?
I'm in the Galilee Sea.
That somebody might
look, the water is red,
some kind of CGI
like blood.
To fake for us.
Look at the water.
But this has been
a
by various
very, very bad omen.
News outlets, Post, Artists, Reuters, Daily Mail. This guy here is Dorian. And of course, we just read it off of Lion site.
Hello, people.
So this is an incredible.
Look, I'm in the Galilee Sea.
It has happened before, but I don't necessarily know if that means that it's not something we should keep our eye on, right? I'm not going to get up here and start predicting for you guys. Oh, the end of days is right on the cusp. I am, however, going to say that that's incredibly bizarre, and I don't like it. So there is that there. It just adds to the list of incredibly strange things that has been taking place recently all across the world at the same time that we have China threatening Taiwan, and North Korea and South Korea threatening each other, and Israel at war in Gaza, and Saudi Arabia, grinding its teeth against Iran, who is also grinding its teeth against Israel, while Russia fights against Ukraine, while Trump fights against seemingly everybody. And it's just, like I said, it's just weird, man. It's just a lot of really weird stuff taking place. And so I decided to talk to you guys about it because it's my show and we talk about whatever I want to. All right. Next subject, more Confederate statue stuff. You guys know how much I love my Confederate statue stuff. There have been some plans to restore torn down Confederate monuments. However, there is a worry that it may end up costing far too much money. This is from AP News. Restoration of torn down Confederate monument will cost $10 million over 2 years, the military says. Sorry for the pop-up here. Again, this is originally from AP. Restoring a memorial to the Confederacy that was removed from Arlington National Cemetery at the recommendation of Congress will cost roughly $10 million total, a U.S. Army official said Wednesday. That would be this last Wednesday, August the 6th. The latest development in a Trump administration effort to combat what it calls erasing American history, which, for all my criticism of Donald Trump, me and him are in complete and total agreement on this issue. There has been a systematic effort to erase American history, and him and Hegseth have done some to combat that. Some of what they've done has just been really, has accomplished nothing, quite frankly. But some of what they've done, has certainly been a step in the right direction. And so I do want to give credit where credit is due and commend them for that. This example here being a good one. This, by the way, is the monument that is in question. It was this picture being taken in 2023. It is currently not standing any longer. If I remember correctly, This is actually one of Moses Ezekiel's monuments. I'm going to double check on that right now because I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. Authorized on March 1906, former Confederate soldier and sculptor Moses Ezekiel was commissioned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Yes. So this is a statue that is meant to commemorate all of the different Confederate soldiers that died in the war. It was commissioned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, which is a lost cause group, and sculpted by the very famous Jewish American sculptor Moses Ezekiel. And I think they unveiled it. It says here, let's see, June 4th. So it would be the day after Jefferson Davis's birthday. But nevertheless, 106th anniversary of Jefferson Davis's birthday, which is June the 3rd. So it was removed actually only 3 days after this photo that you're seeing was taken, December 21st of 2023. This picture was taken December 18th. Let me check down here. Yeah, December 18th of 2023. And now they're talking about, of course, restoring it. It is a beautiful statue. I mean, my goodness, right? To talk about a work of art, Moses Ezekiel is an underrated sculptor, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he was so into so many of the lost cause things that unfortunately people who found that to be distasteful just never gave him the light of day, or time of day rather. By the by, isn't it ironic how, some of these guys like Nick Fuentes and Ryan Upchurch and others want to be so anti-Jew, but it's actually a Jewish guy who was trying to preserve American history here in Moses Ezekiel. I don't know, just noting it. Anywho, once back in the cemetery, the monument described a few years ago as problematic from top to bottom will also feature panels nearby that will offer context about its history, said the officials, speaking on condition of anonymity about a project still in progress. The Pentagon expects it to take about 2 years to restore the monument to its original site, the officials told the Associated Press. The base that it sat on needs to be replaced, and the monument itself will be refurbished as well. On Tuesday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced the Pentagon would reinstall the memorial at Arlington, an expanse just outside Washington that once contained the land of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, less than 2 years after it was removed on the recommendation of an independent commission. And of course, the only reason it was removed is because of the whole George Floyd thing. There were a bunch of riots taking place. A bunch of the liberals decided that they were going to try and overthrow democracy, even though for some reason we only care about that when it's January 6th, even though, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. Look into Chaz, or CHOP, as it was later called, if you don't recall. But anyways, because of the fact that a bunch of people were getting violent and quite literally murdering their fellow Americans, a bunch of other people decided that it was a great idea to capitulate to the violent folk. And so we saw a whole bunch of Confederate statues and monuments taken down, a whole bunch of things named after Confederates, renamed. Fort Bragg, for example, being a famous example. The Washington Redskins and Cleveland Indians were, of course, both renamed. The Florida State Seminoles came under fire. Holy Cross Crusaders even came under fire because it was just going after everybody, right? The statue of Theodore Roosevelt outside the New York Natural History Museum came under fire. The 54th Massachusetts statue, which is an all-black regiment, by the by, was vandalized, so on and so forth. And everybody just decided, hey, let's just capitulate to these completely insane communists. Hegseth, and I actually really like Hegseth, to be fair. He's probably my favorite member of the Trump administration this time around, or either time around for that matter. And I did quite like Pence, and I even kind of like Vance too. But I really like Hegseth. And I really appreciate that he is wanting to restore this monument back to its original place and, kind of flip the bird, so to speak, to these wokies who want to destroy our history. I very much appreciate that from Hegseth. Let's see. On social media Tuesday, Hegseth said the Arlington statue, quote, never should have been taken down by woke lemmings. Unlike the left, we don't believe in American don't believe in erasing American history. We honor it. And again, I could not possibly be more pleased with that. Could not possibly be more pleased with that. I think that for everything I talked about in the beginning of this video, there is certainly a lot of truth to the fact that we do have some victories coming out of Washington these days. And one of those is a re-preservation of American history, which in my personal opinion, preservation of American history is one of the most important things that can be done. It's not the most important thing, certainly. We have the fight for the unborn. We have the fight against sexualization of our women, the restoration of Christ in the schools. Obviously there's a lot about, the whole Epstein scandal is a massive problem, so on and so forth. But this is certainly up there. It's in my top 10, so to speak, of the most important issues in the world, because the fact of the matter is history, culture, and tradition are really the glue that keeps a nation together, right? The reason why we are Americans and not New Yorkers and Idahoans is because we have a shared history, we have a shared culture, and we have shared traditions. And you could add a couple other things to that as well, such as shared language, shared beliefs, shared values. In many nations, you could also add a shared ethnicity. In the United States, I don't know if that's as true as it is in other nations, just because of the nature of the melting pot and also how massive we are as a country. But it's certainly not untrue. Like there is genetic markers in me and genetic markers in my friend Veckel, who's a black man, that would both line up with each other in marking us as Americans, certainly. So there's not no truth to that idea. Digression aside, though, when you start to lose those things, common language, common heritage, common culture, right? You start to lose the very essence of what it means to be a country. And many people have noted that they feel as if there is at the least two countries within the borders of the United States of America. And frankly, I can't blame them. I think there really is multiple nations within the borders of the United States of America. Now, can that polarization come to an end? Well, barring revival and reformation, which only comes from the Holy Spirit, I don't think it will. That being said, can the Holy Spirit accomplish that if he sees fit? Of course he can. Absolutely. One of the things that will be included in that, if indeed this nation is to be restored, and if indeed our nationhood is to be restored, the essence of what makes us a nation is to be restored. One of the things that will be included in that will be the restoration of American history, the reappreciation of American history. Certainly not glossing over anything. We want the country to get better, right? We don't want to return to chattel slavery of African Americans. We don't want to return to genocide against the Native Americans. But we also don't want to pretend as if the people who accomplished great things in this country, like Robert E. Lee, like Theodore Roosevelt, like Thomas Jefferson, weren't heroes. Because they were. They were heroes. And you can cry all day about, well, Robert E. Lee fought for the South. Okay. He's still a heroic man. Well, Theodore Roosevelt had less than savory views about eugenics and race. Okay, he was still a very heroic man. Thomas Jefferson with Sally Hemingway. Okay, he's still a very heroic man. Frankly, the only reason we don't know about all your problems is, number one, we don't live 100 years in the future, and we don't know what kind of things are going to be considered culturally detestable at that time. And secondly, we just don't have a massive amount of access to your life in the same way that we do with these very public figures. And by the by, that's not to say that there isn't room for criticism. Certainly there is. We don't want to be moral subjectivists, after all, right? But we also don't want to see the decimation of our history in order to appease woke mobs that hate the United States of America anyhow. And so I am very appreciative of the plan here to restore this Confederate monument, and I hope that we end up seeing the restoration of other Confederate monuments as well, and not just Confederate monuments, but monuments of honoring American history throughout, and things like names. Right? Let's get Washington Redskins back. Let's get Holy Cross Crusaders back. Let's get Ole Miss Rebels, with those rebels being those rebels, back. Let's get that stuff back, and let's do so without ethnic animosity and hatred, without ethnic vainglory and an unwarranted sinful sense of pride, right? Preservation of American history does not have to mean that we are degenerate, right? In fact, I think really, if we want American history to be preserved, we are going to have to behave godly, because the preservation of your history and culture is a blessing. And God is not going to be in the business of blessing an apostate nation. At least I believe. Obviously, he can do whatever he wants. Nevertheless, I love this. I think this is a genuine win. And I hope to see it actually completed before somebody can come to power that will end up destroying all the good that Pete Hegseth is doing here. Continuing forward, the Confederate monument erected in 1914 was the creation of sculptor and Confederate veteran Moses Ezekiel. That's my son's name, Moses. Not Ezekiel, but Moses. It features a classical female figure crowned with olive leaves representing the American South alongside sanitized depictions of slavery. Sanitized, not really. In 2022, a congressionally mandated commission recommended that the memorial, along with scores of other military assets that bore Confederate references, be either removed or renamed. Retired Army Brigadier General Ty Seidel, the vice chair of the commission, said the group found that Ezekiel's memorial was problematic from top to bottom. And, of course, who the hell cares what Seidel has to say? The Arlington National Cemetery's page on the memorial noted that aside from the sanitized depictions of enslaved people, the statue featured a Latin phrase that equated the South's secession to a noble lost cause. Now, this next sentence says that's a false interpretation of the Civil War that glorifies the conflict as a struggle over power of the federal government and not the institution of slavery. Let me just be perfectly frank. This statement, this sentence right here from AP is a lie. That is a lie. Now, was the Civil War about slavery? Yes. Yes, it was. If you find Confederate nationalists and lost causers who say that it wasn't, that is also a lie. However, it was not only about slavery. And in fact, it was not even originally about slavery primarily, right? People always ask, well, if it's about states' rights, the states' right to do what? And that is a very simplistic and reductionist view that really does not give us a proper understanding of the history. Look, first of all, almost no war in the history of the world is about one thing. Let's just make that perfectly clear. Not the Revolution, not World War II, not the Civil War, not Vietnam or Afghanistan or the 7 Years' War, whatever. Almost no war is about only one thing. There are typically decades upon decades of geopolitical and sociopolitical factors that go into the declaration of war. And in fact, many of the reasons for war are often unstated. Sometimes the things that cause two groups of people to build up resentment against each other are things that don't actually make their way into official documentation when the war is actually declared and the armies start marching, right? So as proper students of history, we just need to understand that this idea that a war is about a thing is just a lie. It's not true. Wars are almost never about a thing. They are about many things all of the time. History is complicated. It's just the way it is, okay? Back to the point, though. Well, if it was about states' rights, the states' right to do what? That misses the fundamental point of why states' rights was a concern. And by the by, the Confederacy, in my opinion, happened to be right about that concern. Now, they happen to be wrong about what caused the concern, namely slavery. And obviously, God is sovereign. He saw fit for the Union to win. The Union, therefore, was supposed to win. And I even think that it, ultimately, the freedom of the American black man was a greater thing than the preservation of states' rights. Although it would have been fantastic if we could have had both, right? That being said, the good guys won, in other words. That being said, the Confederates did have a real concern. The Constitution did not give, and Abraham Lincoln even knew this, the Constitution did not give the Union the right to force itself on the Confederate States. Without a constitutional amendment abolishing slavery, which is precisely why we have one that ended up passing after the war, without a constitutional amendment abolishing slavery, the Union states simply had no right to take what at that point was private property away from the Southerners. And certainly the federal government had no right to tell the individual states whether or not they could have slavery legal in their region. Now, to be fair to Abraham Lincoln, he actually didn't intend to do that. The radical Republicans did. He was a little bit more moderate. What he wanted to do is make it to where no new state, or new territory for that matter, could have slavery within its borders. The argument against that was, if a Southerner from Florida, where slavery is legal, moves to the Arizona territory with his property, i.e. his slaves, the government does not have a right to confiscate his property, especially if the state of Arizona has not itself actually decided that it's going to outlaw slavery. And considering things like the Mason-Dixon controversy and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of context that even goes into that. And again, I understand that this is a sensitive issue because of the fact that we're talking about human lives here. But it is not as if the Confederates and Southerners there didn't have a point. They did, certainly. Again, would it have been better if both sides recognized that the other has a good point? If we could abolish slavery while at the same time maintaining states' rights? Yes, that would have been the best possible scenario. That's not what happened, right? Again, history is complicated. But nevertheless, you can't separate slavery and states' rights as they pertain to the American Civil War. Was the war about states' rights? Absolutely. The Lost Causers are 100% right about that. The federal government was overreaching, and by the by, the federal government is the one who invaded those states, not the other way around. On the flip side, your mainstream historian also has a point. The war was definitely about slavery, and obviously the South seceded first and shot the first shots. So the point here is that this is a much more complicated issue than mainstream popular historians make it out to be. This idea that, it says here that a false interpretation of the Civil War that glorifies the conflict as a struggle over the power of the federal government and not the institution of slavery. The idea that it has to be either or is balderdash. It was very clearly both. It was very clearly both. And if you are teaching people that the war was not about federal overreach and states' rights, you're lying. That's what's happening. To be fair, if you're teaching people that it wasn't about slavery, you are also lying. Both sides that refuse to acknowledge the other has a point. They're not misinformed. They are lying. They actually know the right answer, and they're deliberately lying to you. Now, where this becomes important for our purposes is if we can be more nuanced, if we can be better stewards of history, we can have a more robust understanding not only of the events, but appreciation of the figures and movements involved, right? There's nothing contradictory about believing Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln were both honorable men, because you understand that it was a complicated issue at the time, and honorable men could end up on either side. There's nothing contradictory about thinking Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee were both honorable men, or William T. Sherman and Stonewall Jackson were both honorable men, or Jeb Stuart and Philip Sheridan were both honorable men, or James Longstreet and Joshua Chamberlain were both honorable men, and so on and so forth, right? There's nothing contradictory about that sort of thing, because you recognize that these events are complicated. And that therein leads to an ability to be able to appreciate these things and not go out of your way to start attacking people, right? When they want, for example, a statue honoring the nearly 300,000 some odd, I think it's 275,000 is the most recent estimation, Confederate soldiers who died in that war, who were Americans, by the way. Oh, yeah, well, they were traitors. Yeah, well, so were the people who had initially founded this country. You don't seem to have a big problem with that, right? One man's traitor is another man's freedom fighter. And again, that is not to appeal to some kind of moral subjectivism. It is simply to say the issue is murky. It's complicated. These sort of reductive statements, oh, no, it tries to frame it over the federal government, not an institution of slavery. It is very clearly both. It's very clearly both. If you find someone who's telling you it's one or the other, stop listening to them. They're dumb. They don't know what they're talking about. Okay? And this is a rule that applies to every single war that's ever been fought. Every single war that's ever been fought. Was World War II about Hitler invading Poland? Of course. Was it also about Germany trying to get revenge on a Allied army or Allied nations, rather, that had unfairly punished them? Of course it was. Was it also about Hitler's ridiculously, absurdly evil ideology that wanted to establish himself as the Aryan race, his people as the Aryan race, and find more living space for his people? Of course, that was also true. And there are other factors that went into World War II as well, the Great Depression, and so on and so forth, right? The Revolution, was it about taxation without representation? It absolutely was. Was it about the intolerable acts and British oppression and British tyranny? It absolutely was. Was it about religious liberty and freedom from the Church of England? It absolutely was. Was it about manifest destiny and wanting to expand past the Appalachian Mountains and take land from the natives? It absolutely was. It's all of the things at the same time. And we need to be better stewards of history and recognize that these issues are complicated. It doesn't mean there's not truth. It doesn't mean there's not true good guys and true bad guys. It just means that we need to be nuanced on these issues. Pressing forward, Hegseth has made a point of circumventing the will of the commission several times. Love it. Again, Pete Hegseth, my favorite member of Trump's cabinet. Now by reverting the names of several army bases back to their original Confederate link names, though by honoring different figures, which, to be fair, is actually not accomplishing anything. Not accomplishing anything. You're still capitulating to the wokies when you're naming it after a different figure. You're just saying, well, technically it's Bragg, so yeah, but it's not Braxton Bragg, right? For example, following the recommendations of the commission, officials renamed Fort Bragg, a name that honored Confederate General Braxton Bragg, a slave owner who lost several key Civil War battles, to Fort Liberty. To be fair, Braxton Bragg was a terrible general. He's awful. And I'm talking just strictly as like militarily, he was not good at what he did. In February, Hegseth reverted the name back to Fort Bragg, but honoring Army PFC, I don't actually know what that means, Roland L. Bragg, a World War II soldier who earned a Silver Star and Purple Heart for exceptional courage during the Battle of the Bulge, which, no disrespect to Roland Bragg, American hero, however, that doesn't actually accomplish anything. That's putting a Band-Aid on a gas leak and expecting everybody not to drop. But the establishment of the Arlington Monument, the reestablishment of the Arlington Monument, that does really accomplish something. And so I want to, the point of referencing this article is to say there is much good coming out of this situation. And I'm very pleased with Mr. Hegseth for what he has done here. All right, speed round, friends. There's a couple things we want to talk about very, very briefly. Okay. First things first, according to OSV News, Pope Leo tops Gallup poll of world leaders and does so across party lines. That is right. The Gallup poll does a poll on world leaders to list all of their approval ratings. 57% of respondents viewed Pope Leo XIV favorably, with only 11% disapproving, and the additional 31 to 32% having no real opinion. This was across party lines, Democrats and Republicans. This even seemed to be across religious lines. And of course, this is something that we ended up seeing with Pope Francis as well. The reason we want to reference it is because everybody needs to know that the papacy every day is getting more and more and more power, both culturally and politically, and that is a problem. We need to be vigilant and watching out for the rise of the papacy, because just because Francis died does not mean that the Franciscan agenda has died. Okay, we are still going to see the Vatican pushing for a two-state solution in Israel. We are still going to see the Vatican pushing for an internationalization of Jerusalem, for the rebuilding of a new temple that is parallel to, not on top of, the Dome of the Rock, so that it can represent some kind of world peace. We are still going to see the Vatican push for a United Nations type group, but for religions. All that stuff is still going to take place. It's just that Francis didn't accomplish it because the Lord took him before, right? and you know, where he took him, you know, you guys can debate about that amongst yourselves. I think you guys know how I feel about Catholicism. But as the Pope and the Catholic Church generally get more power, we become more and more and more likely. It becomes more and more likely, rather, that we see these things actually come to fruition. And as it stands right now, Pope Leo the 14th has a higher approval rating than any of our last 4 presidents, that being Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. The next thing we wanted to talk about very briefly, there was a pastor, Adam Schiff, who was Adam Schiff was the murderer. Adam Schiff, a radical Jewish extremist, killed a Catholic priest in Arizona about a month or so ago. He actually ended up crucifying him and planned on killing 14 more. Randall Schoenemann was the Catholic priest. And of course, I believe he is in glory now. The man, Schiff, the man who killed him, was not associated with any major Jewish fundamentalist groups and seems to have been acting alone. But we did want to talk about that just to give a little bit of look. I feel very strongly about Catholicism. I also think the Lord will honor those who die for Him, who die for His name. So now, and of course, a lot of people are taking this as an opportunity to start getting very anti-Semitic. I would also like to point out very many Jewish voices, both Jewish Christians and Orthodox Jews and secular Jews as well, came out condemning Schiff for what he had done here. So, you know, wanted to point that out as well. But we want to honor, we want to honor this pastor as a martyr, as he should be honored. Schoenemann died for the gospel, persecuted for his faith, and he should be honored as one of the martyrs here in America. So, you know, want to note his sacrifice there, and of course, give glory to God, who has, you know, ordained this, I believe, to take place for His glory. Prayers, please, with the Schoenemann family. I know we're a month late, but nevertheless, I did want to mention it. Speed round. We're going quick, right? What do we have next? There is a new plan in Israel. The Israeli cabinet has approved military takeover of Gaza. Now, you have heard me say for a long time that I do not actually believe it was Israel's plan to take over Gaza. I have not changed that. I don't think I was wrong. I think things developed. Okay, I don't think it was originally their plan to take over the Gaza Strip. I think it became their plan to take over the Gaza Strip once it became clear that removing Hamas was not going to be as simple as they initially thought. I actually think this is a good thing. I've said this numerous times. I don't believe there is such a thing as a Palestine, and I think that the land belongs, the whole land of Israel belongs to the Jewish nation. If I were them, I would also annex Gaza, and I would annex Judea and Samaria as well. Now, of course, we do want this to take place without undue suffering to the people who identify as Palestinians, the Arabs there, right? We certainly do not want mass execution or starvation of citizens, and it does seem like there are famine-like circumstances in the Gaza Strip at this time. Roughly 81,000 people in Gaza, a combination of citizens and militants, have been killed. So pray for peace. Pray that the Israeli government is operating humanely. Pray that those who do commit war crimes will be held accountable for it. But also, I think this is actually a positive thing. You know, Meir Kahane once famously said back in the 80s that annexing the regions, Judea, Samaria, what we commonly call the West Bank, and Gaza, was going to prevent suffering. And as it turns out, he was exactly right. All of this suffering would have been avoided if this land was just recognized as Israel to begin with, and there was no Hamas, no PLO, no Palestinian Liberation movement, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a step in the right direction. And I do think, again, I don't think this was always the plan. I think this was a change in the plan To read briefly from the National Review article, the Israeli Security Cabinet approved a plan on Friday morning that will allow Israel to take military control of Gaza City, the first step in what could become a broader operation to occupy the entire Gaza Strip. Israel's goal in the expanded operation is to achieve decisive victory over Hamas while delivering humanitarian aid outside of combat zones, the council said in a statement after the 10-hour meeting. So yeah, I think this is a positive thing, and I hope that we end up seeing it manifest as a positive thing. More than 800,000 homes could be built on land owned by churches, according to an article from Realtor.com. Quote, in the middle of America's housing crisis, a surprising solution is taking root not in city halls or planning departments, but in church fields, synagogue parking lots, and the overlooked parcels of land owned by houses of worship. With home prices far outpacing wages in many places across the country, communities are searching for new tools. One of the most promising and least expected is faith-based land. It's part of a growing national movement known as Yes in God's Backyard, or YIGBY, positioned as a counterpoint to Not in My Backyard resistance. YIGBY takes a mission-driven, community-first approach, helping religious institutions transform their underused land into desperately needed housing. I am not certain how I feel about this, to be honest. Part of me thinks this could be a way to further weaken the church's influence in America, and another part of me fears that it might actually strengthen the denominations, the socio-political clubs that we call denominations, influence in America, which I don't think is a positive thing. So really, both of those are bad, and they're on either side of the coin. So it's like either side of the coin could potentially be negative, but also there is potential for positivity here. So it's something worthy of note that I think you guys should be reading more into. This one, little local news that I found very cool from 103.5 KISS FM. Things in Boise, Idaho are changing quite rapidly, and that has some residents wondering whether other major changes in Idaho's capital could occur, rather. This includes the possible outlawing of strip clubs in Boise. Currently, as it stands, strip clubs are very much legal in Boise, as long as the club in question has their permits and paperwork in place. However, not all residents are keen on having a club that is made with nude women located near their homes. Boise so far has 6 or 5. It lists them all somewhere here. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 strip clubs in its city limits. These strip clubs are not allowed to serve alcohol, and there's certain permits they need and all this kind of stuff. And I think most of them aren't actually full topless, but I'm not sure about that. Nevertheless, there is a growing movement within the city of Boise to ban strip clubs within the city limits, and I actually think that's a pretty positive development, to be honest. Certainly cities have a right to do that if they see fit. Boise's a fairly liberal city, so I'd be surprised if this movement won. But if it did, I think that'd be a very cool thing. We need to make it clear that sexual objectification of our women and girls is not a good thing. And look, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have been like immune to pornography throughout my life. In fact, I've struggled with pornography heavily throughout my life. Okay. And that was my fault, by the way. I'm not blaming the girls for that. They're responsible for their sin, which is putting it out there. I'm responsible for mine, which is watching it. I could very easily say no, right? You can think of it like the drug dealer and the druggie. The drug dealer is responsible for selling it, no doubt, but the druggie's responsible for buying it. And the drug dealer is not responsible for the druggie's buying it, just like the druggie is not responsible for the drug dealer selling it, right? And I think we have a similar thing going on here. So I'm not trying to condemn these people, right? I certainly understand the struggles. That being said, it is better for society if we all collectively agree this is bad. We should not be objectifying our women and girls. And if local cities want to use their municipal power to ban strip clubs, I'm all for it. Like I said, I don't think this is actually going to happen. But I hope it does. And who knows? I might even join in the movement to try and have it happen. Almost done with the speed round. Trump says he will meet with Putin in Alaska next week. This article was published on CNN today. President Trump says he'll meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin next Friday in Alaska. That's Friday, a week from today, August 15th. After earlier in the day previewing terms for a potential peace deal to end the war in Ukraine that does include some swapping of territories, which is an interesting development that I'm sure Ukraine's not happy with. Quote, the highly anticipated meeting between myself and President of the United States of America, as President of the United States of America, and President Vladimir Putin, of Russia, will take place next Friday, August 15, 2025, in the great state of Alaska. Further details to follow, end quote. Trump posted on Truth Social Friday evening. We are going to be reporting on that as it happens next week, and hopefully we have some positive things to report to you guys. Lastly, but not leastly, the Christian nationalist pastor with ties to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. That's right, our good friend Doug Wilson is in the news. He has a whole interview with CNN talking about his Moscow movement. I think we might actually review that interview. If you guys would like to see that, go ahead and comment in the comment section down below saying, yes, I would like to see it, or at the very least would like you to review it in a Watchdog special report. If you do want to see that, I would be more than happy to go into the details of it with you guys. All right, we're done. If you like this video, please remember to like and share this video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, with the ability to get notified every time we go live. Leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, or critiques in the comment section down below. Take a breath, Jay. All right. If you'd like to contribute to the work we do here, you can do so by going to the PayPal down below to give a one-time donation, or to the Patreon down below to subscribe and give monthly donations if you appreciate the journalistic work we're doing here and the punditry we have here. I certainly appreciate your contributions. Also, if you want something more tangible for your contribution, you can purchase my book link below, 15 Questions for Calvinists Answered. It is not a political book. It is a theology book, but it's the only one I published, and I certainly recommend you buy it. Again, like, share, subscribe. Please be vigilant. Please be watchdogs. Think like a Neanderthal, as we like to say. Joe Biden called us Neanderthals. Well, fine. We are Neanderthals. Forget it, right? And ask yourselves, of course, this question. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise